Why were North Vietnamese casualties so high in the Vietnam War? At the start of 1968, the Tet Offensive was launched. Up until this point, the Americans had been promising the public that the war was nearly over and it was only a cleanup operation left. The Tet Offensive changed all of this. The Viet Cong and the NVA rolled through South Vietnam, and over a quarter of US casualties in the entire war were during the year of the Tet Offensive. However, over six figures are shown for the casualties of the other side. But why is this? Well, the first natural thought is to not even question it. Of course, American soldiers would be better trained. But the reality is somewhat more confusing. Let's look at the soldiers who were actually fighting on either side. So during the Tet Offensive, the Viet Cong were basically obliterated. From that point onwards, if the Viet Cong were operating, it was going to just be NVA troops. The NVA, for those that don't know, being the North Vietnamese Army. The NVA and the Viet Cong both shared a long military heritage, and many of its members had been fighting for decades. On top of this, they were trained in the small unit guerrilla warfare of the PLA. And while they favoured the Russians, their tactics most definitely favoured the Chinese. And so America encountered a problem. Out of its troops, a vast majority of the new troops rolling in were pretty inexperienced, especially compared to the decades-long veterans they were facing in the field. However, only about 10% of American troops at any given time would have been in a position to actually make contact. About 90% were support or rear echelon. The Americans had to learn the lesson that in the jungle and in the actual art of, man-to-man warfare, they were never going to be able to match up with the North Vietnamese. It was their land, their weaponry was not particularly obsolete, and their actual fighting experience would outstrip anybody in the US military short of their special forces units. And even then, still. However, the Americans learnt the same lesson in reverse. They were never going to be able to face the North Vietnamese or the Viet Cong in the way of a traditional army and just hammer them. So what they were going to do was use their advantages. Cambodia and Laos were bombed, and one of the biggest bombing campaigns in history began. Artillery, bombs, guns, and planes. That was to be the new enemy of the North Vietnamese. And it worked.